welcome to The Trek. The Trek is a Civics Unplugged series where community members participate in meaningful discussions on topics that are too often neglected when thinking about building the future. Through prompting questions and provocations, we venture together into complex but important conversations related to building the future and democracy. We understand that this work requires ongoing dialogue, but it's a journey worth trekking through. I'm Madison, a high school senior from Verdigris, Oklahoma, joined by some of our community members and a special guest, which we'll get to hear from in just a moment. And today we're talking about free speech. And we always start off with a word association. So when you see your name on the screen, introduce yourself and say the 1 to 3 words you associate with the topic and why.
Hi, I'll begin. My name is Jae-Hee, and I am a junior in high school calling in from Dayton, Ohio. And word associations that come to mind would be not so simple. I feel like public discourse has changed, and like the free marketplace of ideas that the First Amendment is supposed to advocate for isn't as simple as it was back when most ideas flowed through oration or typography. And so with the internet and television and social media, public discourse has become highly nuanced, and so free speech becomes a little more difficult to deal with.
The words I just came up with just at the top of my head that real quick was that restrictions with excuses, because I hear a lot of them are like, oh, so like a lot of people, a lot of countries, not this country, luckily, but other countries, they are like restricting like social media, like certain things that you can see on social media. Like I heard in Canada, they're doing a bill about people only really trying to target people with mostly Canadian patriotic things, which goes against freedom of speech, but they're still trying to pass it, which would restrict a lot of content for Canadians. And a lot of other countries are doing that too, with other copyright bills trying to, and they always come up with excuses and stuff for it. Like patriotism. Like, I don't think patriotism should be sacrificed for free speech.
Well said. Where are you calling in from?
Oh yeah, in Detroit, Michigan. That's where I'm calling from.
Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Angel. I'm 19. I'm calling in from like the DC area, the suburbs. And when I think of free speech, I think of the phrase "to an extent." I think that is pretty self-evident. I do believe that there are instances in which free speech should be restricted because when it goes too far, it infringes on someone's, I guess, dignity to exist, or dignity and their, I guess, right to exist. Yeah, I completely agree with Jae-Hee. I also think that is extreme, the concept of free speech, especially in the modern day, is extremely nuanced.
My name is Hannah, and I'm a freshman in high school from Texas. And I associate the words constitutional right because I think that, it is a freedom of speech, is our constitutional right, which should be protected unless it is directly causing harm or violence. It's our liberty.
Yeah. So I'm Roman. I'm 15. I'm calling in from the suburbs of DC, like Angel, in Maryland. I don't know if she's in Virginia or just DC. Nice, yeah. In any case, I think I have one very simple word, and it's just human, because I think that there's something that is really unique to humanity, and it's that we're able to think, that we're able to come up with ideas, and that we're able to share those, that we're able to communicate them. And so I think that it's such an essential part of our lives to just be able to say what you're thinking. I think that there's nuance that comes to it, but on the basic level, I think that it's just a key part of human existence.
Hi y'all, my name is Phoebe. I'm calling in from Dallas, Texas, and I'm a senior in high school. The two words that I think is compassion and education, because I think free speech allows us so many liberties, but it's important that our delivery is also on par with our humanity, as well as education, because we all know how false information and fake news can also start a lot of problems that are unnecessary. And so it's important to be educated on the topics that you're speaking about.
Hey folks, I'm Will. I'm calling in from just outside of Philadelphia on the other side of the Delaware River in New Jersey, in my home. I love this. You folks have got to a bunch of words that I was thinking about too. Here's my two. First, optimistic. I think free speech is optimistic because the idea that wakes me up in the morning as someone who defends free speech for a living is the idea that we can advance together without killing each other, right? There's this fundamental optimism in the idea that if we exchange words instead of bullets or fists or whatever, we can advance and we can get closer to our own individual truth. So that's optimistic. My other word would be pessimistic, because I also think that free speech is kind of a check on power, as some of you alluded to, right? What's the first thing that goes in a dictatorship? Freedom of speech. So you have to be a little bit pessimistic about the intentions of the folks who have power. The duality, exactly, Angel. Yeah, so that would be where I put it. Optimistic and pessimistic at the same time.
That's great. Hey everyone, I'm Gary calling in from New York City. I would say my word is underrated still, or two words, underrated still. I think one of the reasons why I'm really excited about how CU expanded internationally, or is open to international kids, is that we are one of the rare countries that has these civil liberties. And we better protect them.
Yeah, along the same lines of many of you, I would say mine is everyone should agree. Of course, there are going to be variations in what people see as free speech based on, I guess, like the things that people have mentioned before. But I would say in general, free speech lays the foundation for our democracy. And without it, we really just cannot function as an effective democracy without the freedom of speech. And so I think that everyone should agree on that basic principle. But now we can go ahead and hop into the conversation. So does anyone have a question or provocation to get us started off with?
So I think a good one is like how do we a good one is when does free speech go too far? I think that's a good way to start it. So we can kind of define like what kind of free speech is like the best. So I think in my opinion, I think it's like violence or harm to other people. So when it goes too far.
I have a quick question. Are we allowed to ask a specific trekker to not necessarily to respond, but like a question, if that makes sense? Madison?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, cool. So I was actually thinking about the same question too, because I think a lot of the conversation about free speech and whether or not it should be restricted very much dwells along the lines of how do we differentiate free speech from hate speech. And like, as someone who actively works within this realm of defending the right to free speech of people that come to you who, as defendants, I was really wondering what you thought, Will, or what's going on in the legal world of how we can conceptualize when free speech becomes unacceptable and when it treads the line of hate speech.
Yeah, Angel, this is a fantastic question. I'm glad we get to start off here, and likewise, Adam, for kind of teeing it up. This is the number one question I get when I speak to students and faculty and lawyers across the country. Okay, Creeley, we like free speech, but what about hate speech? And this short answer, because I know being concise is a virtue here, is that there is no legal definition of hate speech, right? And a little bit of that, just a little bit of that reasoning is that it's really hard to define. This is where, Angel, your to an extent comes up, right? The First Amendment is not absolute freedom of speech. There are exceptions. They're narrow, they're well-tailored, and they're definite. They're always contested around the margins, but the First Amendment doesn't protect everything. So with regard to hate speech, a lot of people think hate speech is not free speech, but the vast majority of speech that we might consider hateful is protected by the First Amendment. And the reason is that there's no consistent enforcement from the government. We don't want to entrust the government with defining what is and isn't hateful. the last administration and the current administration probably disagree pretty significantly as to what speech should be permissible and not. Think about the last administration's response to what happened in Charlottesville, for example. They might draw a different line. So the better answer that our courts have come up with, and I think it makes sense, this is back to the optimistic part of me, is not to entrust the government to draw that line. So I'll stop it there and be curious to hear what folks think.
Yeah, I would say I definitely agree with that, and I think that one of the problems that I've encountered in debates over free speech compared to hate speech is this idea that we need to rely on the government to define it, and that we need to rely on the government to take action on it. Now, of course, if classic example is if you go into a theater and yell fire, the government should probably take action on that and probably put you in jail, right? There should be some enforcement. But when we're talking about hate speech, especially things that we see online, maybe I would say that government action, I don't believe is the best way to really deal with it, because I think that once you start enforcing definitions of hate speech, you start creating a limit on both sides. So first of all, what I think it does is that it may put innocent people in a position where they are now guilty because of a definition that is made by a government. But at the same time, it also makes it so that the people who are, who face hate speech and who are victims of it may be victims under one definition, but not under another, right? And so as things evolve, as technology evolves, and as communication evolves, people who were once protected under a definition may not be anymore. And so I think that we need to look rather towards away from government and enforcement action, but rather towards what we can do within our social communities to make sure that hate speech is adequately, that people are held accountable for it, and that people change. And I don't think that the best solution there is the government. I think that there's better ways that we can do it within our own communities.
And I want to pose a provocation related to this question, so feel free to go back to it or respond to this. But the provocation is, spreading lies should be protected as free speech.
It's a good one.
Well, going back to what Angel's question was, I believe that hate speech should be protected because it cannot be defined properly. So, and what one person might think is hate speech it might not be hate speech. And especially when the government is enforcing stuff like this, it could definitely change versus what the administration is now and what it could be later or what it was before. So I think that this is not hopeful, but I think that we could definitely see our views being silenced and said, and people claiming that it's hate speech when really it's not.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that. Yes, what I agree with that is that like the government can always change its definition of hate speech. So like they could say, oh, you're anti-war, so that's hate speech, and then jail you for that. In like the past, the government's always done stuff like that, like stuff like the Espionage Act, where the government would jail people for speaking out against war. They could do the same thing for hate speech. Like they have like their limits. Like they could say, oh, you criticize politicians, that's hate to us, so they could jail you for that. Certain stuff like that. And there's been times in the past where the government's done that. Sedition Act, a lot of these acts where the government has done stuff like that. So but yeah.
I think all of these responses are absolutely yeah, it's giving me a lot to think about. I think that I feel like I'm also coming at this from like a more, not necessarily an international perspective, but like I'm also keeping in mind the context of other, I guess, democracies and how they might think about hate speech. And I think I'm reminded of how Germany conceptualizes the boundaries of free speech and hate speech, specifically when it comes to issues dealing with the Holocaust and like direct denial and anti-Semitism, and how like speech around that, in speech that espouses that kind of hate is heavily policed. But then again, please don't quote me. I can put some links in the chat. And so I'm wondering whether or not, because we are mostly operating from like, we're heavily enveloped within the American context because this is all we know. And so it seems as if we do not necessarily legislate the boundaries of hate speech, but like conceptualize an actual working definition of hate speech, and have like a stronger apparatus that will help, that will, I guess, not attack hate speech, but that is set up to deal with hate speech. Because we don't have that, we're kind of fearful of the repercussions, and we think that it's, I guess, a direct harm to our democracy. But I'm once again thinking about Germany. I'm wondering if we're really conceptualizing it in the right, not in the right way, but I wonder if there's a different way to conceptualize it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a great point, Angel. And I think that this ties back to something I was thinking, and it's that, you know, with kind of these both, with both the question and the provocation, I kind of see one common theme, and that's proactively protecting against hate speech, or what is it, retroactively protecting against it. And so I think that the Germany example is a good one, but at the same time, we have to consider that the reason that they ban, you know, the reason that they ban like Nazi symbols and stuff related to the Holocaust, or like denial of it, is because it's an event that's already happened, and so they're not doing it proactively. I mean, sure, maybe they're censoring it so that it doesn't happen again, but I really think that the censorship was there because it happened. And so I think, you know, to the provocation, spreading lies should be protected as free speech. I think that one of the definitions that we can come to is something that poses, or that has posed, a serious threat. And so I think the example that I come back to is kind of the insurrection that happened on the Capitol. A lot of it was tied back to conspiracy theories and fake news. You know, you look at stuff like QAnon, and I think that now I would say, you know, I don't know too much about QAnon. If we know the person who's behind it, I don't think we do. But if that person was revealed, I do think that we would be on the ground, or that we may be able to have the legal basis to take action against them, just because it's speech that has proven to lead to harm. But on the other side, I think that every time that we've proactively tried to suppress speech, for example, like Adam was saying, during World War I with the Sedition Act, they were trying to stop people from causing problems. And I think that that is problematic as well. So I think that we need to strike this balance between proactively censoring speech to stop harm, and doing it retroactively to make sure that it doesn't happen again, and that we have this proof that it has led to harm, because again, you know, one of the big things is that we live in a society where you're innocent until proven guilty, right?
I'm going to jump in here just for a second, because Angel, I love the way you teed that up. The most interesting class I took in law school was comparative constitutional law, which is, let's figure out what other countries do. How do they organize their democratic processes? And my mother's from New Zealand. So I've got all these Kiwi cousins. And when I talk to them about what I do, they say, well, what the hell are you thinking? Like, you are defending the rights of these people who think these horrible things. I mean, surely there's a better way. And me, I have to be, this is where the optimistic, pessimistic American comes in. I get to be, well, I believe that I can convince people otherwise, right? I believe that if you try and ban speech, it will get this mythical power, right? You're not going to ban someone out of thinking something. You're just going to make it more alluring and interesting. What does the government not want me to see? I'd rather take out that idea, drag it out into the sunlight, to quote Justice Louis Brandeis, and go at it from there. Is really tempting, especially in the situation of a country like Germany, right? So I understand, I get it. But then I look at what's happening in Germany right now, and the far right is rising. You got neo-Nazis. You haven't banned the idea out of existence. I don't think ultimately you can ban ideas out of existence. I think you got to change minds, and that's the hard work. That's the hard work of it. But Angel, I love that idea because other democracies do it, and they have their own experience. It's not just, I mean, this is America is unique in this way that we have this commitment. And again, my cousins look at me like I'm crazy. So there are other ways to do it. They've got a functioning democracy over there. This is the American experiment. So I love that point.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to both points, I guess. So like I could see like why other countries might do it, but I think like if it incites violence, especially from like the Supreme Court case, Ohio v. I forgot what it was called, but it like decided that free speech should only be I think it should only really be limited unless it incites violence. Of course, hate groups are pretty bad. I think the education programs would be good for that, against like hate groups. For like hate groups. So yeah, I think that the line drawn should be like if it incites, or if the person, so like if a person's saying, oh, I inciting a school shooting or something, I think that they should be held to justice or something like that. Let's take the Capitol riot as an example of something like that. I think if they're like saying, oh, like we're gonna go on then I think it should be seen as like a threat that's inciting violence. So yeah.
I almost find this conversation of like discerning between hate speech and free speech very disappointing, because there's a lot of like conversation around how we should regulate the people who are speaking, but not so much about the people who are listening to it. And I feel like it's underrated to cultivate a really critical eye within the public on how they receive the ideas that they're being presented or even fed, because like speech, it can carry different functions or imports. It could be towards your ethos, your logos, or your pathos. And I feel like hate speech, it usually primarily appeals to pathos, to antagonize in a destructive manner. And so back when there were the famous Lincoln Douglas debates, there was an interesting instance where Douglas was speaking, and then the audience was applauding, and he said something along the lines of like, I'm sorry, but I don't want to receive your enthusiasm or passions, but I'd like to receive your judgment and your understanding and your conscience. So I think that we should also consider, how the public is digesting this information.
On the question of should spreading lies be protected as free speech, on a science side, I think that censoring right now we could see as lies is not right, because science is always changing. An example of that would be in the beginning of the pandemic. I think it was Dr. Fauci had said that we should not be wearing masks and leave it to the healthcare workers, because at that time we didn't have very many, and obviously the healthcare workers need them. But now it's recommended that everyone wears it. So, I mean, at that time, would censoring people who are saying maybe everybody should wear a mask or just that type of thing? Science is always changing, and it's on a much greater scale than that for much more important issues. So what we could see right now as something wrong might be the right thing later. And censoring ideas that might be lies right now is really not a good idea.
And I love that point. I'm just going to jump in. I'm sorry. I'm doing my best not to jump in. You guys are all saying such interesting things. I want to talk after every minute, so I'm doing my best. Hannah, I love that. One thing I often try and keep front of mind is the experience of Galileo, right? Who deviates from popular opinion and is killed for it. And say, wait a second, no, we're not, we are not occupying the place in the cosmos that you think we are. But that's heretical at the time. And so poor old Galileo, gave his life. So I try and maintain a little bit of what my boss calls epistemological humility, right? Like we don't know everything. So you have to be open to the surprise, the the change. There's this great quote, which is apocryphally attributed to John Maynard Keynes, where he's questioning somebody, or somebody's questioning him and saying, hey, but you wrote all this stuff. And he said, yes, I did. And he said, well, what you're saying now is the opposite. He said, well, when I receive different information, I changed my mind. What do? Oh man, like I love that. I try and keep that in the front of my head, especially now that I'm a parent, because kids will tell you when you're wrong or inconsistent.
Yeah, so I'd like to speak more on like this is that like how like if we do, like let's say we do limit free speech when it comes to lying. I think that the establishment, politicians, all these other people who are up there in society wouldn't be restricted on lying because they lie all the time. They can't really stop it. But with people, they'd still keep the people. They usually when like the government poses a limit like on free speech, usually the establishment doesn't follow it and gets away with it, while people, ordinary people who are lying, for instance, or presumed to be lying because in the future that it could come out to be true, they're the ones who have to suffer, while the people up in power don't. So yeah.
Yeah, I guess I found what Jae-Hee said really interesting. But I think that one of the fundamental issues is that there's always going to be I think really one of the things is that it's very, very hard to control how people interpret things that are given to them. I think that it's probably harder to interpret how people listen than how people, or it's harder to control how people listen than how people talk. And I think that really comes back down to education. Now, that said, I think that there does need to be a fine line between between free speech and between lies in the media. And I think that one of the most notorious examples is just the crazy media bias that we have now. Now, while I do think that having more opinions out there is better, I think that there's also that all those opinions need to be based on the same fundamental truth of what is actually going on, right? And so I'm not trying to suggest that everything should, follow the status quo, because of course, right, we were just talking about the thing about Galileo. I think really what it comes down to, I think, is some sort of light control, maybe over media. I think we used to have the fairness doctrine in place. I think that was FDR who put it in place. It was there until the 80s. And so what that did was essentially it boiled media down on TV down to around 3 or 4 channels. Now, of course, that was also because of technical limitations. Okay, well, I don't know that I said that there should be some control over media. I just think that media should be steered in some way to arrive at this same sort of fundamental truth, and then build different opinions off of there. And so I think really one of the key provisions in the fairness doctrine was that you weren't allowed to have opinion hosts on TV. And so when that was repealed, when that was struck down, what it allowed is a bunch of channels to have opinion hosts who aren't political commentators. They aren't necessarily the most knowledgeable, but especially they're not going to really say what is right. They're going to say what drives an audience, because they're not reporters, they're not journalists, they're entertainers, right? And so there needs to be this big difference between media and the press and entertainment, which I think is something that has really shrunken over time.
Yeah, I think Roman brings up a really, really important point, along with what Adam and what Jae-Hee said. I feel like specifically, I think someone brought up the QAnon example earlier. I think that was you as well, Roman. And I think it's important to consider how, honing in a little bit on Adam's point as to if we, actually, let me reformulate. I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's easy to cut off the head or one of the heads of the Hydra. But if I might be getting my Greek mythology incorrect, more will grow back in its place, especially if we only focus on the source or the actual person being vocal about what is being espoused through the hate speech, and we don't focus on the people who are, you know, intaking this information and internalizing it, and then thereby spreading it to their friends and families and their communities. And with that being said, I do think that the solution that Roman proposed is extremely important. Not only does it come down to education, but when it comes to our media, our news media specifically, the truth and opinion and bias are heavily conflated. And there is no clear distinction as to what is what. Someone on the news can spout something that they believe to be their opinion, but then the way that it's packaged to their audience, people take it as truth. And I think that that is not only the cause of, I guess, differing definitions of free speech and the line between free speech and hate speech, but it's the cause of, like, it's the fundamental cause of polarization in this country, I believe. And so I think there needs to be a greater emphasis on, I feel like it always goes back to critical thinking. There needs to be just a greater emphasis on teaching the greater populace how to dissect the information that's being given to them by the supposed like fourth pillars of democracy.
I'm gonna jump in. Oh, I'm sorry, Hannah, I'll be 2 seconds. I just sent out a link. This just came out today, and you folks are on the cutting edge here. I sent a link, and hope you all get a chance to read it. It's a bunch of civil liberties groups and free speech groups teaming up to take on this exact problem. You know, it goes back to how can we have a debate if we don't have an agreed understanding? If we don't have a shared reality, it gets awfully tricky to talk to each other. And if we're all reading different news sources, and those different news sources are trumpeting different facts, we are going to miss each other. So to Angel's last point, one of the real strategies that this group wants to push is media literacy training for young kids, so that you get to analyze news stories with a trained, educated eye, critical thinking, to your point. So you folks are right on top of it.
I really liked what Angel said about critical thinking, because I think especially in school, we should be taught about not how to think, but we should be given the resources on how to make our own decisions and decide what we want to believe in. And on the topic of the listeners to the speech, which Jae-Hee had mentioned, I think this is a problem that's happening now, but I believe that the speaker should not be punished for how the listeners take the speech, what they do with that speech. And because it's not the speaker's fault if they did not, you can look at what they say, and sometimes the listeners will take that to an extreme and do something completely different than what the speaker says, and they do it in the name of the speaker.
Yeah, I guess this is giving me just a lot of ideas, and I know I've spoken a lot, so I'll just be very quick. But I think it kind of makes me think at some solutions, and I think one of them that we can see is how we used to do the press. Now I'm going to call it the press because I think that there is a difference between the press and media. And so before, like I said, you had basically three news channels. You had PBS, you had CNN, and I think ABC, something like that. And then you had those individual ideas, which we don't want to suppress. We still want them to be in circulation, but they were in little newspapers. Now, also the way that it's presented, I mean, if you're trying to read a newspaper, you're not going to see, a 50-word little blip and just form your entire opinion around that, right? It's impossible to do that, right? On a newspaper, you have the front page. Okay, it's supposed to be a little, attractive to get people to pick it up. But then you see very clearly defined sections. You see, a very clearly defined opinion section and things like that. And so I think that really looking back at how we used to do it and just the fundamental difference between the model before, which was to inform people, right? It was still to make money, obviously, but it was mostly to inform people. And today, how it's so much more just about making money and getting people to click, getting people to watch. That's why I think a lot of our media looks like entertainment. A lot of CNN debates, I know this because I watch it all the time, a lot of CNN debates look like sports debates. And it's funny because ESPN and CNN are owned by the same parent company, right? So I think looking back at kind of how news used to be, I think is a good example, and also looking at how foreign news is. I think that we do see that some publicly funded news stations are really, really good. BBC, Al Jazeera. I think that, ideally there should be the least state hands in media, but I don't think that publicly funded press is necessarily bad, especially in democracies like ours. I think PBS is a little publicly funded, and I think that's one of the greatest sources that we have. So I think looking at different models, looking at how we used to do it, looking at how other countries do it, I think is a good stepping stone.
On that incentive of the media to really hack into our attention economy, I think that the relationship between people who are within the audience and then the people who are delivering the ideas, it's so abstract. And we could also like retrace like our lack of critical thinking skills to our education system, but I think we could also mention how information is exchanged these days as a cause, because of like how much information we are submerged in every single day with like hyperconnection from the internet. We receive a lot of like decontextualized information. We often don't get to hear the full story. We get little sound bites or little pieces. And because of that glut of decontextualized information, um, we've seen a lot of things happen like internet hoaxes, and people get even more critical and more uncertain, such to the point that the pendulum goes to the other side almost. And that creates a space for really crazy conspiracy theories to exist, that are more polarizing and supposed to be more critical when they offer the illusion of context.
I've been thinking a lot about how, we talk a lot about critical thinking and being balanced and not just forming strong polarizing opinions and stuff. But I think you learn so much of how you develop those skills is by modeling, like early on, is modeling yourself after like role models. And I'm curious who are your role models for critical thinking?
So my role model, I guess I'd say, my role models, I guess, are like people who there's this guy, there's a few people, I guess you could say. There's Jim Quick. He made a book called Limitless. He talks about like the importance of like improving your brain to help your thinking and stuff. And like goes through like these thinking processes. So like I think it's really good to have like detailed like thinking. So and also another person I'd say, my history teacher, because she doesn't just go over like, I guess, like the generals. Like she goes over like different people in history, not just like the most powerful. Like she goes through like everything, all the truth. She doesn't have like a more censored version of history like other teachers I've had in the past, who only really talked about those in power and not really what the people on the ground really went through. So but yeah.
Yeah, I like that Adam talked about teachers. I was gonna say firstly my dad and also my fifth grade teacher, just because of the like two of the same thing really, and that's that they taught me to be skeptical of things. I think that often when we're growing up, it's just kind of our intuition to believe anything that we hear. I think that may just be correlated to us, wanting to see like this wonderful world or whatever, right? Or just believing anything really. And so I think that really teaching kids to not be like pessimistic, but to just be skeptical, to not, to not be stubborn, but at the same time not be so manipulable, I think is a really important thing. And so I think that always having a healthy dose of skepticism is always a good thing. And I think that it's something that we should teach kids, early on.
On skepticism, I don't have like a person, but I have like a behavior model offered by this guy on Twitter called Julian Shapiro, and he was saying something like, most people consume information for a dopamine hit, thoughtful people consume to refine their understanding, and then effective people find information that challenge their views and change them when they're wrong. And I totally agree that the third category, finding views that challenge your own and making a new iteration, is a really good way to cultivate critical thinking.
I would say my role models for critical thinking would be my mom, who is my history teacher, because I'm homeschooled. And I think one book that's very good is Lies My Teacher Told Me. I think it's called Lies My Teachers Told Me. There's different editions of it, like a teacher's edition, a student edition. But I think it gives a lot of different perspectives on what's happened in history. And also my father, because I feel like we've been through a lot of different things. We've learned, we've consumed a lot of different information. We've seen behind the scenes how things are. And I think he's taught me how to make important decisions and forming opinions based on how it's going to affect us and all the other people around us.
I think for me, I think I grew up in an interesting household where, due to maybe culture, maybe sometimes religion, maybe the intersection of both, encouraged not questioning, to be quite honest with you. So I would say my first actual interaction, like direct interaction with critical thought and an environment that encouraged critical thought was, so funny, debate. 9th grade, my debate coach, love him to death. I feel like there's just something intrinsic that debate teaches you about formulating opinions, formulating an argument, and also seeing that argument from both sides and being able to effectively argue against either side that you're defending. So yeah, definitely debate, which is definitely like, it's a much more direct answer to the question, considering the formula or the format of debate, a high school or academic debate. But yeah, my debate coach for sure.
All right, anyone else want to add one before we move on to reflection?
I got one just because I'm thinking of it. And I love that you folks said your dad, a couple folks said their dad, because I'm trying to teach my kids, whenever they see a commercial, I'm saying, what are they trying to sell you? Right? Think about it. Don't look at the story, don't look at the joke. What are they trying to sell you? So I would definitely think of my father as well. But one person, just on the history note, reading the historian Jill Lepore, her recent book, These Truths. And what it reminds me of is that we're only alive for this little short bit, right? And everything that's happening right now seems immediate, urgent, important. But what's nice about reading this book is the history of the United States and before, right? The history of what was native land, now America, and she captures the whole sweep of it. So I find it useful sometimes just for a sense of perspective that the problems that we're talking about here, how to deal with viewpoints that aren't founded in reality, how to deal with hate speech, how to deal with folks who disagree with us. These are new and immediate problems to us, but they're also old problems, and it doesn't lessen them of their urgency, but it does give me a new perspective. So historians generally, and Jill Lepore in particular.
Okay, great. Thank you all for sharing those. I think this is a good place to move on to reflection. So I'm going to go ahead and send a link to the notes in the chat so that you all can look over them and think of what your reflection is going to be. And while you're doing that, I can go ahead and get us started. So I really enjoyed this conversation, and with what Will just said and what happened earlier in the conversation when Angel brought up I guess the geographical perspective, I think not only for free speech, but for every issue in our democracy, it's so important to just step back and zoom out and, have that historical lens and that, I guess, geographical lens, to step back and realize that, these are issues that have been going on for, since the beginning of humankind, and they happen everywhere in the world as well. And so it's important to look other places for solutions instead of just looking domestically.
Yeah, I guess I can go first, just because I'm actually gonna have to leave a little bit earlier. I think one of the main takeaways from this really was cultivating the mindset to effectively take on free speech. And so whether that's or taking on harmful free speech, sorry, or hate speech. And so, whether that's thinking about it proactively or retroactively, whether that's through education or through developing critical thinking and skeptical skills, I think that really it's given me a lot of insights on what we can really do to effectively have a democracy where free speech is valued and free speech is really a core of it. But also at the same time, make sure that speech isn't, that someone's freedom of speech isn't degrading on someone else's freedom of humanity, right? So yeah, it was a super interesting conversation, and thank you all so much. I think I have to go right now, but yeah, see you all.
I can go. I think this conversation, I was so happy to just listen to everyone's thoughts. Gave me a lot to think about free speech, but also about the implications of hate speech. I think my favorite takeaway was definitely when Jae-Hee said we need to think about how the listeners are also impacted. I thought that was so amazing, and it gave me a lot to think about.
Yeah. So for me, my reflection is that we should of course like educate ourselves on like things that we're consuming, but I think that we should and also have like gratitude towards our freedom of speech. A lot of other countries have it more censored. And also try not to use your speech to harm others, even if it's not required that you don't do that, because it could really hurt them and take away their freedom. So.
Right now, we live in an age where cancel culture is very popular, and I think we need to see everyone else's side of the issues, and we need to be not necessarily sympathetic, but just appreciate that they have the freedom of speech to say this, and we have the freedom of speech to say something else. And just because you don't like something doesn't mean that it shouldn't be there, like it shouldn't exist, that speech shouldn't be out in the world. And I think we can apply that by just, you know, not taking what someone else is saying the wrong way, and not taking it like back to the speaker and the listener. We should think about what the speaker is saying and how they want it to impact us. And at the same time, we need to be judging them and seeing what we see wrong with that and what we like about it.
In reflection, I think that I came into this track thinking of speech in a very like a constructive logos oriented manner, but from the very beginning, when Angel brought up the point about how hate speech can almost like existentially disenfranchise some humans, really brought into the point that free speech can also be used to suppress other speech. And I thought that that was so profound.
I really like the way that you phrased that, Jae-Hee. Just gonna put that out there. But then again, I love the way that you phrase everything. I think honestly, I'm leaving this track with a lot more questions as usual, and a lot more areas to research and a lot more things to read. But I think my main takeaway, I kind of just made this connection, but I think I would like to think of free speech and, our right to speak, right, as akin to like the analogy of the tragedy of the commons, in which the commons is the realm of the ideas, and we all have access to that. And theoretically, we all have equal access to that realm. However, as we have the right to speak, we also have a duty to others to protect, not necessarily to protect, but to respect their right to speech. And their, like Jae-Hee just said, their right to speak is also contingent on, I guess, their dignity as a human being. And I think just leaving this track with that framework in mind helps me like digest everything just a little bit more.
Yeah, I'll jump in. This has been fantastic. My takeaway is that I wish we had another hour or two. I mean, this is my first trek and it feels like it's over too soon. So a lot to think about. I want to thank all of you for modeling for me how to engage an incredibly complicated subject, one that I've given 15 years of my life to, and you have got to the bleeding heart of some of it in very, very short order. So I guess to my mind, it is to be inquisitive and to always remember the most useful exercise as a free speech attorney I have is, what if it was a speech that I liked being treated like this? What if it was something I agree with? When I defend speakers, and we'll defend speakers on both sides of almost every issue you can imagine, we have a saying around the office: if you get to defend speech that you agree with, it's almost like cheating. It's almost too easy, right? It's the real challenge when you have to defend the folks you disagree with. So I think my takeaway here is to remember that folks like yourselves, who are young citizens coming up in the world, have a lot of questions. So I have to kind of commit myself to the hard work of engaging and answering, because none of this stuff is easy. It's all complicated. It's all how we interact as human beings. These are old questions, but they're immediate and new to us. So to continue conversations like this, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity. So thank you.
I thought this was an amazing conversation, and my reflection and application is more of a challenge for Will to think about what topic he wants to trek on next, because I think we opened a lot of amazing threads. And actually, I don't know, Will, if you know this, how I, like, very shortly after I met Jeffrey Silverman, he invited me to a civic forum, right, for next gen politics, and I attended your session. I thought it was just amazing.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Gary. I appreciate that.
So I'm not surprised that this was such a good conversation, and
that means a lot to me. I really very much appreciate that. That's the work, right? You got to do it every day. So thank you, Gary.
Yeah, so this is an invite to you to come back whenever you want.
Accepted. I'll be there. So name the time and place. As far as I'm concerned, as a civil liberties attorney, the most important thing I can do is talk to young folks figuring this out too, right? I wish somebody had talked to me. So that's if I can do that, then I feel like I've put in a good day's effort.
I love it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Will. Can't wait to have you back. Maybe we do a free speech part 2. Maybe we branch off and do something a little bit different. But yeah, you can just let us know.
Yeah, real quick, just in case, like if you find yourself reading those links or saying, hey, Will, what about that one thing? Or I've got another question. I'm will@thefire.org. So you can always shoot me emails. Again, that's part of the job too. Work pays for my phone, so I have my leash right here. I'm always like 1 minute away from emails. So hit me. I'm waiting for it. So I mean that 100%.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for that too. And thank you all for coming. It was a great conversation as always, and I will see you later. Bye.
Gary, really quickly, do you remember when we did the trek on like that article?
Yeah. So I was actually going to bring that up, that that can be a follow-up one. Like this group can, so Will, we've done treks where the topic is literally like a piece of content. So what if, like, so I know that you gave us 2 pieces of content, like maybe we could do a trek on one of them or both of them, or you think of something like really good that we just discuss for an hour.
That's a good challenge. That will be my homework. I will think of something good. These are good, but one of them is just a summary of an open letter, and the other one is a relatively short blog entry.
Okay,
so I'll
great.
think of something meaty.
Awesome.
Okay,
Thank
sounds
you,
good.
folks.
Bye, y'all.
Have a good evening.
Yeah, bye.